Media law is a complex topic. So in this section, I've broken out some specific areas of interest at this point in our mass comm studies. So in this unit, we'll talk about copyright with respect to media law. So there is one point I want to make, that there is a difference between copyright and trademark, although they are both important parts of the law. So trademark is more about covering names and phrases and logos. You register trademarks, so that has to happen. Something has to be registered with the government to protect a trademark. And AP Style does note, has a section on trademarks, and so for instance, Kleenex is a brand name. It should be capitalized when you use it in any type of writing that you publish. And in fact, if you don't capitalize it, you may get a letter from Kleenex that says, thank you for using our brand name, but please capitalize it next time. So that's trademark. Copyright is a little different. And so copyright law basically attaches anytime anything, any content is created, really in any concrete form. So that means that if you publish a book or a magazine or make a web post or tweet, any kind of content that is created in a concrete form, so not just you speaking into a room, but where it's actually sort of put onto paper, as it were, even if it's virtual paper or video, copyright attaches. And so if it's your content, you are protected from someone else taking it. And you're protected from taking someone else's content. So there's no need to file or register anything with the government. There used to be, but now it's just, if it's out there, it is protected by copyright. So using something without permission, without having the copyright to that, is stealing, right? So it's punishable at most organizations by being fired. It is a significant problem, and we want that to be the case when we are in a field like mass comm, because we're all going to make our living off of the content that we create, and so we don't want someone just taking it and using it for free, unless, of course, you create it that way, that you want somebody to take it and share it and use it for free, which is sometimes the case. So work published online does constitute copyrighted work. So it's not free just because you can find it on Google. So sometimes we think, oh, it's on Google, it belongs to everybody. No, it still belongs to the person who created it, or the company. That's where it's a little confusing. Like I worked for the Express News. I didn't own the copyright to my work because I was being paid by the Express News to produce it. So the Express News owned the copyright, although of course I was given permission all the time to use it, to publish it as my clips and such when I needed to put stuff out there. So let me just point this out too, is that sometimes, I'll talk a little bit more about YouTube, but YouTube is a big sort of monitor of copyright, and so you may see something that you find on YouTube sometimes that says this video is no longer available due to a copyright claim. So YouTube will take content down if it violates copyright. There's a lot more we'll go into on that. So one of the ways that we can create content that we want to be shared is called the Creative Commons. So this is a form of copyright, but it's Creative Commons, where we want people to share our content and we want to make it freely available. So in general, Creative Commons, if you see this symbol, the CC, or if it says Creative Commons, it generally means that it's free to use for non-commercial use. So sometimes it's free for commercial use as well, but in general means non-commercial use. So you can't put it in an ad and use it, you aren't supposed to make money off of it essentially, but it's free for you to use with attribution most of the time. Now, it's always ethically, you should always attribute where you got something. That makes perfect sense, right? You want to share the responsibility and the creativity of somebody, but sometimes you have to use attribution. I say ethically you always use attribution. There's also something called public domain, which is once something has been around for a long time, basically, and then although the period of time varies, but in essence we usually say about 100 years, then it's in the public domain. So it is true that copyright can be renewed on older content, and that does sometimes happen, and the law varies sometimes by when it was created and what the length of time was. But in general, think of that, it's got to be really old before you can just take it if it was originally filed under copyright. So there is a way for you to search through Google for content that is copyright free or Creative Commons, that sort of concept, right? So if you're in Google Images, I used images for example, so if you're in Google Images and you click on Tools, Then you can bring up usage rights, right? So it sets up this whole separate area down here where you can search by size of image or color of image, all kinds of things you may not have known when it was published. But if you search under usage rights, right now I've not filtered for license or copyright. But you can filter for labeled for reuse with modification, just labeled for reuse, labeled for non-commercial use, et cetera, et cetera. So these areas would be in the Creative Commons realm, right? So if I search for labeled for non-commercial reuse with modification, I bring up these images, right? So there are some images there that we could use. And so this takes you to somebody's Flickr account, and then you can find out who created this content, and you would want to give them permission, give them credit, right? So it shows you some rights reserved. You want to click on that and find out what's the criteria for you using it, and then you want to give them credit for having produced that image. Very important to check to see what the rights are. So in this case, it's that it is Creative Commons, right? You're free to share, copy, and redistribute this material in any format. The licensee cannot revoke that freedom so long as you're following the terms, right? And it does say the terms in this case are attribution. Give them appropriate credit. So Creative Commons has all of these various ways, and so you may see these images, these different sort of Creative Commons images, and so here's a little bit of a key for what that looks like. There's another whole area of Creative Commons, which I think we sometimes forget about, and it's interesting, is the government, right? So this is whitehouse.gov. And in whitehouse.gov, the copyright policy, if you look for the copyright policy, basically says that everything here is under Creative Commons. And that's because you, the people, we the people, have paid for everything essentially the government does. And so any content that is created is basically created with our tax dollars, as it were. And so we own that copyright. Like, we have the right to use the content. And there's a few little disclaimers in here, and that would be if, say, someone gave the government something like a painting, or gave the government something, content they created, say a painting, and said, we want this to retain the copyright of the original artist, then that would be different. That's a very rare circumstance. So in general, if you find something, a video, press releases, images, that sort of thing, that's where we see it most often. You are free to use it under Creative Commons. It is always good to check the Creative Commons license on that. Same thing with state government, etc. So there is copyright law, a concept called fair use, and that's why you will see things in a classroom, and journalists use this law as well. And it's a little bit of a gray area, so it's open to some interpretation, but essentially it says that if you're using it for non-commercial purposes, you can use an excerpt of something so long as it doesn't diminish the value of the whole, right? So you can't publish an entire book. You can't publish an entire song. Say you're going to be doing some music reviews and you're working at a publication. You can't use the entire song and say, here is this whole thing, unless you have permission from the artist. But you can use clips of it, right? That's why we hear clips on newscasts and things like that. The same thing with in a classroom. Educators can use content so long as it doesn't diminish the whole, right? I still think it's exceedingly important to attribute where you got it and to give credit to that person, though you may not see that always in classes, but I think that's very important. So I always credit the source. Also, fair use covers some things like transformative work, so taking something old and doing something new with it, parodies, some of those kinds of things. It's a little more nuanced with respect to fair use. And the library does have a checklist. Texas State Library has a checklist if you've got some questions about whether something is fair use. So let's take a look at some of this various content that's been created. So a student assignment that you created and submitted to Trax, assignment you posted on our class website, content on a government website, content on just any media website, an ad created by Dove, and then content in social media. So what of these are protected by copyright law? So in essence, you might guess it, basically everything, right? So all of this created by copyright law. So the government website still covered by copyright, but it's Creative Commons produced, so they label it as such, right? So copyright, copyright, copyright. So even the story that you submit in class, you have created that on a document and submitted it, it is covered by copyright, which means that you own the copyright to this content just the way it was written, even if we're all using the same set of facts. Nobody else can take that and call it their own. And we know in academic settings that would also be called academic dishonesty. But it's true even of the class blog you own, or class website, you own that content the way it was created. You may use it, somebody else cannot take it and put their name on it. So in social media, this is an area that is still evolving in law, of course. And for a time, the wild, wild west of social media was pretty much, it was unclear who owned the copyright and was content copyrighted on social media. And of course, it would seem that it would be, and eventually the courts ruled as such. The case that was brought to court was actually a photo taken by this professional photographer who works for AFP, which is a French press organization, and produced this content for the Washington Post. And the photo was taken, the photographer published it on social media, and other organizations took that photo from social media and just used it without attribution. Well, it makes sense that a professional photographer who makes his living on this, it would be the one to sue. And so filed suit, and this set a lot of case law that basically said photos cannot be just reused. In this instance, it had the wrong attribution, all sorts of stuff. But it took 3 years to work through the courts, and the ruling was that essentially all content created on social media belongs to the person who created it and posted it. This is something that I've posted for you online that I definitely think is worth looking at. This is from the Detroit Free Press, and it was a lovely multimedia piece they did on Aretha Franklin's song Respect on the 40th anniversary of the song. And so there's so much content in here, and the song runs throughout the video. And there was a story, and there was a lot with it. But I want you to look at this in what I've posted online and see all the different images and hear the song throughout. And consider how the Detroit Free Press got this content and how they could use it. Was it all fair use? I will tell you that they could have used the song because they used many parts of it. They could have used it under fair use potentially, but they decided ethically if they were going to do a story on a song called Respect by somebody from their town, they should pay the respect of buying the copyright to it, right? Buying the right to use it for their production. So they did. They paid the music licensing fees and used the song. So check it out. It's really a very nice story. What about video, right? What about video on YouTube? Yes, so YouTube under Show Me More, if you ever happen to look at that, it will tell you how something is licensed. Almost everything on YouTube is licensed under standard YouTube license, primarily because people don't think to change it. But somebody like HBO purposely wants to tell you that, right? I will show you more on just how to get copyrighted content that you have permission to use on YouTube in another video. But that's all we'll do here.